Good morning, everybody. We're all here. I'm not quite awake still. Putting together a beta actually takes a lot of time. Been up till after 1:30 every night. So yeah, you're here for Zend Framework 2, I'm assuming. If not, there's other talks. Lots of really good ones, actually. So yeah, it's been a long road to Zend Framework 2. Last year, I was up on stage barking like a seal, and while Ralph talked for me, talking about Zend Framework 2, and we were really in very early stages back then. And some exciting stuff has happened in really actually the last 6 weeks, and a few people up here will understand what I'm talking about. I'm just going to jump in. I've got actually a lot of stuff to talk about. The goal of Zend Framework 2 is really better consistency and performance. If you want to sum it up in a nutshell, it's right there. Along with that, extensibility and all that jazz, but really consistency and performance. Why? It's because what our users are wanting. Performance from Zend Framework 1 has gone rapidly downhill as we add new features, and we want to make it better. We also want to make it so that when you go to profile your application, you can actually understand the workflow. How many here have profiled a Zend Framework application? Yeah? Is it fun? Yeah, no. In terms of consistency, what I'm talking about here is Zend Framework 1 has evolved tremendously over the years. I've been involved with the project practically from the start. I started writing code for it in January of 2006. We've had 5 project leads, of which I'm the 5th. And so, there have been different visions and goals. And as a result, between that and the huge amount of contributions coming in, there's a lot of inconsistencies. It makes it really hard to learn. How many of you were able to pick up Zend Framework in like an hour? Yeah, none of you, right? So we want to make it easier. We don't guarantee we're going to get you up and running in an hour, but we really want to make it simpler for you so that you start learning it and you can start running with it. So those are the goals, and we have a lot of ways to get there. First thing is we really want to embrace the new features of PHP 5.3. When Zend Framework started, the big thing we were trying to do was embrace PHP 5. Because back then, PHP 5 just wasn't getting adoption, and yet there was this huge object model that was amazing, especially for those of us coming off of PHP 3 and 4. This was a huge step forward. It's the same thing with 5.3. There's so many features that you really should be using, and that actually make our lives as framework developers easier as well. We converted everything to namespaces. I talked about that last year, and moved to an auto-loading only framework. So you no longer have these require once statements everywhere. We have imports, so you have these use statements at the top of every file. But there's some really cool things we can do with those. We use closures. How many of you are using closures now? Good, a lot of you, good. I use closures in my examples today and also in my talk tomorrow, mainly because they're so simple. You don't have to set up this whole class structure and everything. You just, here's a callback. It's really nice. Late static binding. Poster child for late static binding actually came from the Zend Framework in 2006. How many of you saw the webinar that Mike Neberezhny did? A few of you. So he actually introduced a concept there where he's getting the table name and everything. It wasn't possible back then because we didn't have late static binding. Now, it's funny. I thought, well, that's really the only use case. But as it turns out, we're building a framework. We want you guys to extend that framework. So in order to do that, if there are anything static within the framework itself, you need to be able to extend it. So we use late static binding. Functors. How many of you have used those yet? How many of you don't have a clue what I'm talking about? Okay. It's a new method and a new magic method added to the class structures within PHP called __ invoke. Basically, once you have an instance of an object, you can call it as if it were a function. We're using it within our plugin system for the view layer particularly, but in a number of other places as well. It's a really nice way to have a stateful function, basically, is what it comes down to. We're using SPL tremendously. Liz, right there, loves SPL. She's giving talks about SPL. She's been evangelizing it for years. We standardized on PHP 5, and SPL was in there, but it's grown over the years. And since our baseline is 5.2.4 in Zend Framework 1, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we weren't able to take advantage of. With 5.3, we can actually take advantage of that. We're using things like priority queue, most of the data structures in SPL, a lot of the exception structures, which are tremendously valuable to developers. We're even using GoTo. And yeah, we've got one fan here. That makes sense in some places. How many of you started with BASIC in the 80s? God, I date myself. There's a lot of you here. Good. We're all used to GoTo, and of course, then we had to train ourselves not to use it. And now we can train ourselves to use it again where it's appropriate, like parsers, event systems, that sort of thing. So we really want to build on these features, make something that's extensible, something that we can all use, and show you some practices that you can use in your own development. Next on the road is using solid design principles. How many of you are not familiar with this principle? It's not a principle, it's actually a group of them. Most of you, really. So we've got our single responsibility, the open-closed, list-cop substitution, dependency inversion, and I missed the interface segregation. The whole point of this is we've had some problems with people being able to extend the framework. How many of you monkey-punched the Zend Framework 1 at this point? I have. You shouldn't have to do that. How many of you have ever tried to exchange a new dispatcher within the front controller? Yeah. We're not actually using the interface we designed. We're calling other methods. It's not good. The other thing is, how do we actually get our dependencies into the controllers? Say, for instance, you need to load up a database. How are you guys doing it? How many of you go to the registry? Okay. How many of you are grabbing it out of the bootstrap? Did you know you're using a singleton to do that? It's hard. And we're trying to make it easier for you to actually do good object-oriented programming using the framework. And so we're trying to embrace this. Probably the biggest thing we're doing is the idea of contract-oriented design, where you're saying, here are the interfaces. We will program just to these interfaces at this time. So that's one of the other pillars of the development at this point. Next one is fully embracing HTTP. How many of you here are not developing for the web? There shouldn't be I actually saw one hand here. I'm shocked. PHP is a web-specific domain language, right? So what is the web about? It's about HTTP requests and responses. There's a specification for this, several actually, and we can go and utilize that. Well, the way that the request and response objects work in Zend Framework 1, not great. They abstract some of it. They don't do a good job of extracting what they do, and we tried to make that better. Ralph back there in the white shirt, I don't know if Enrico's here or not. Anyway, they spearheaded a rewrite of the HTTP component, and it's really rich at this point. And with that, we now have the kernel for something that we can really call an MVC at this point, because the MVC is about accepting these requests and returning a response. The last one, and this is probably the most important one. No, not probably, it is the most important one, is the community. Zend Framework community has had a meteoric rise since 2006. I remember when it was just a handful of contributors, and now we've got over 300 who have committed directly to the SVN repository. Even on Zend Framework 2, we've gone up to almost 100 individuals who have submitted pull requests that we've honored at this point. We've listened to feedback from users on our mailing lists, from Zend clients, from issue reports, Twitter. I've seen stuff on LinkedIn, Stack Overflow. There's all sorts of places out there. The community is driving what we need to do in Zend Framework. They're saying, hey, this is how I want to use it. So we need to build towards that. Right now, we've had a watershed moment about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and the community basically called on us and said, hey, you need to be more open. And at that point, we were actually ready to, we were ready to drop a bunch of stuff in their laps anyway. And so it's gone from basically no MVC to a full-blown MVC within about 6 weeks. And that's the strength and power of community. And we've got a bunch of the contributors here, and I'll be calling on a few of them to stand up later. So sorry, guys. But yeah, the community is an army of elephants at our disposal that make the framework what it is today. So with that roadmap in mind, the first thing that we started working on was a new core. And no, it's not nuclear science that we're going to talk about today. How did we do things in Zend Framework 1? I was thinking about, what is really the difference with Zend Framework 1 to Zend Framework 2? And I came up with this for Zend Framework 1. Zend Framework 1 is singletons, registries, hard-coded dependencies. And that sounds really harsh, and it is. I'm a critic of my own code. How many of you have used Zend Controller Front as a singleton? Okay. How many of you have ever stuffed anything into the registry and taken it out later? Okay. How many of you who didn't answer that have used the internationalization layer? Okay. basically, the internationalization layer is using the registry under the hood. We're actually using it within some of the Zend view placeholders as well. It seems like a really nice, easy paradigm, and this is one of the things that has gone back and forth on the list in the last few weeks. It's like making it easy for developers. Well, while it might be easy to use registries and that sort of thing, the fact of the matter is later, as you're maintaining that project, it becomes a nightmare. So we're trying to figure out how can we make this better. And the way I'm going to characterize Zend Framework 2 is event-driven design and dependency injection. This sounds kind of Java-ish and not much fun, but it's actually huge. It's a paradigm shift. We can, by introducing solid principles, introducing a few different paradigms like event-driven programming, actually make things simpler for you, which is what we really want to do. If you want to add some logging to arbitrary controllers out there, you shouldn't have to touch those controllers. You should be able to just drop in a logger and have it go. Same thing with caching, authorization, that sort of stuff. It should be trivial. It should be trivial to look at your application and know, just from looking at the methods or the imports, what you're expecting for your dependencies. We want to make it easy for you as a developers to write code that you can maintain later. So the first thing is dependency injection. How many of you hate dependency injection? Okay, no hands, that's good. Dependency injection is one of those things that scares a lot of people, and it really shouldn't. It's a phenomenally powerful thing, and actually all of us are probably doing it already. So basic dependency injection is not magic. It's passing in something to, say, for instance, a constructor. Hey, I need this collaborator in order to do my work, so I'm going to accept it in my constructor and do something. Sometimes we use setters. So we have a set method, and you accept something. We've all done this, right? Who has not done either of these? No hands? Right. So it solves a problem. How do we separate concerns? When I was looking at Zend Framework 2 and trying to think about the MVC layer, I was thinking one primary concern in my head was, how do the controllers get their dependencies? So how do we do it in Zend Framework 1 today? Anybody want to yell something out? Nobody wants to put themselves on the spot? Who hasn't hard-coded a new statement into one of their methods? You haven't? Good for you. Okay, who hasn't grabbed anything out of the bootstrap object? Yeah, nobody. Okay. Basically, these are all things you're pulling in your dependencies. You're saying, oh, I need this. I'm going to pull it from somewhere. How many have tried to test that with mock objects? It's hard. So basically, I was thinking about this. I hated the idea of dependency injection containers, but I realized that it helps solve a problem. Now, it introduces a new problem because now you have to figure out where we create and do those dependencies, but that's where the container part of it comes into play. So your container basically says, here are the definitions. This is the object graph that I want to describe within my system. And when I pull this object, it needs to pull in these other ones as dependencies. And that might go recursively, et cetera. The container also supports containing some specific configuration, the environment-specific configuration in this case. So you may say, when I'm in production, I want to do things this way. When I'm in development, this way. So for instance, this morning, there was a really nice demonstration of that new PHP cloud stuff. Let's say you're working locally on, you don't have internet connectivity right now. So you may set up an environment that is using all local services. And then you may want to use the cloud services later. That's the kind of environment-specific things I'm talking about. The other part is, of course, it handles the creation of the dependencies and the objects themselves, allowing you to, just not think about it. You can do all of dependency injection without a container, but you have to code all of that by hand. Dependency injection container allows you to be a little more flexible about that, and you can create these really flexible object graphs. Now, it's actually can be very simple. This is a simple definition. So we have a foo class with a set bar method that accepts a bar argument that is going to be required, and it's of type bar. So we've got that right there. Now, do you need to do this? Not necessarily. We actually have tools within the DI system within Zend DI that will allow, basically create this definition for you. But this is as simple as it gets. It's just a PHP array. I can do this. Once I have that configuration, I instantiate my DI container. I configure it with the configuration I did, and I grab my class out of it, and it's injected. Now, again, this may look like, wow, this is a lot of code. Yeah, for a single simple demonstration like this, but let's look at your application. Any given controller might have, let's see, you might have your model layer, so maybe you're using Doctrine, now you have an entity manager, you have a database connection associated with that, configuration associated with that, then you might have a paginator that you need to configure before you pass objects into it, a form class, and maybe there's a couple of service methods you need to do as part of this process as well. We're now talking like 12 or more objects. Now consider that across your entire application. You don't want to be going and instantiating those and figuring out, okay, for this particular path, I need all this stuff. You don't want to do that. That's what the DI container does for you. So there's a number of features. Intelligent mix of strategies. Runtime will go and use reflection to try and figure out what the dependencies are for you and inject them for you. You can actually compile them to classes as well. And so that's actually something Ralph is going to be working on for the next beta, is having a list, all these precompiled definitions throughout the framework that you can just consume and use right off the bat. That's going to be incredibly fast because it's just PHP code. You can also build them manually if you want. Normally you're not going to do this, but if you want to and you have some really special considerations, you can go and do that. You can use just regular configuration like I showed you a couple slides ago. And you can also sprinkle in annotations within your classes. Ralph added a new code scanner component that will go through and scan your classes, find methods, see if there's annotations there. If there are, it'll figure out what it needs to inject and create a really nice definition for you, which makes the onus of creating that much easier on you as a developer. So there's a ton of features on this. I could probably speak for hours on it. Ralph could speak for days. He's going to give a single session on it tomorrow at 9:45. So if you're interested in the DI container and what it looks like and its capabilities, I highly recommend seeing that tomorrow. Ralph, you want to stand up? Hey, Ralph. He's one of my engineers here. So yeah, go see his talk tomorrow. He's also got a talk later today, if I remember correctly, on the code scanner, which is incredible. He's going to build a little micro framework using the annotation support and show you how it can be useful in a variety of situations. So I talked about Zend Framework 2 being characterized by dependency injection and event-driven design. So let's move on to that next topic. So what do I mean by event-driven design? Basically, we as developers are constantly creating applications, and those applications are constantly getting more and more complexity. Quite often, there are pieces to the application that are really apply across a variety of concerns. Things like authorization, caching, logging, a whole bunch of different things like this. So basically, we want to enable you to build these architectures that have arbitrary workflows where you can introduce things whenever you want and make it trivially easy to do that. Right now, if you needed to log, say, 3 methods in a particular controller, how would you do it? You'd actually have to drop in the logger and trigger it yourself within your code. What if instead you could just say, I'm going to put in a logger and I'm going to listen for this event and look for this particular action on the route match, and just drop that in one place in your code? That'd be pretty nice. So we developed an event manager component. This actually takes a whole bunch of different paradigms and squishes them into one. It takes ideas of aspect-oriented programming, signal slots, event architectures, such as you see with true MVC layers and desktops and that sort of thing. And it takes that and puts it into a nice little package that you can then drop in. Basic idea, though, is really simple. You trigger events, and then listeners handle that event and do something with it. It's as easy as this simple box of code, which hopefully is going to show up here in a moment. Basically, it's this shows really one of the simplest use cases you could have. We grab our event manager, we attach to the execute event, and the closures here. I'm using a callback. It can be any PHP callback. I'm using a closure because it's all self-contained in the example. So I've got this execute event, and I'm interested in that execute event. I get an event object. That's the $E in this case. And from that, I can extract the name of the event that was called, because I might use this callback in more than one target. I can grab the target. I don't show that, but usually you call an event within a context of a class. And so you'll get now an instance of that class that you can then do some work on, which is tremendously powerful. And then some arbitrary parameters that you might call. And so in this case, I'm grabbing the name of the event, grabbing those parameters, and I'm just spitting out a little bit of stuff there. sprintf actually will not do anything. I should have just said printf. But the idea here is, it could be a simple logger in your application. I then trigger it, and I say, trigger execute. I don't have a context, and then my parameters. It's really that easy. I can sprinkle this in pretty much anywhere and start executing the things whenever I need to. There are a lot of features to this. We have listener prioritization, so you can actually kind of say, I want this to execute really early or really late. And you can take a look at the different order of the items. So this is really useful. In the MVC, we're using this, for instance, to determine when to render a view and when to render a layout. And I'll show you an example of that later. I've used it in a sandbox application for authorizations, and I say, I want to execute this early in the dispatch cycle after routing so that I can take a look and see whether or not I actually need to throw up a, hey, you're unauthorized here, and return that as early as possible. You can do what's called static attachment. So I was mentioning earlier, what if you could attach to the events in a single place? By doing static attachment, we can say, hey, on this particular context, which is usually a class name, I want to listen to this event and with this listener here. And that's really useful for introducing things like, say, for instance, you noticed a problem in production and you want to figure out where that could be. You have an idea, but you're not entirely sure. You can attach a logger in your Bootstrap and just be done with it. And then remove it when you're done. So that can be a really powerful paradigm. You can short circuit. So within your event handler, your listener, you can say, hey, something happened here that I think we need to stop. And you can say, I want to stop. Alternately, whatever's triggering the event can say, I'm going to listen, and when I get a result that's particularly interesting, I want it to stop execution. We use this in the MVC. We look for responses. If we have a response object, boom, we want it to return right away. This is how we get rid of that evil exit hack in the redirector. Result introspection. I mentioned that you get a list of results. You can actually introspect those results and say, hey, do I have something interesting in here? What's the first result? What's the last result? That sort of thing. If you're interested in the event manager, originally this talk was supposed to be about the event manager, but that's moved to tomorrow. I'm giving that talk tomorrow, 11 a.m., I believe right here. So if you're interested in the event manager, I'll have a full session on that, so you can come then. So we've talked about like the fundamentals, the core of the Zend Framework 2, and we've got this dependency injection, we've got event-driven designs. So now with that, we can start building some other pieces. I'm not going to talk about the HTTP component today because, frankly, it's great. It's fantastic. It's not something that's fun for a presentation. I'm sorry, Enrico and Ralph, but there's some really cool things you can do with it. But for our purposes here, we probably really want to talk more about maybe how an MVC works. So let's start looking at the core of the MVC. The talk that, my talks all got mixed up. I had a talk called Dispatch This, and part of the core of the MVC, we have the HTTP. And basically it's saying, hey, I've had a request come in, I want to return a response. This actually suggests a very simple pattern, and we've called that the dispatchable. Dispatchable says, hey, give me a request, optionally a response if we want to encapsulate everything. And I'm going to expect a response or something I can cast to a response afterwards. It's a really simple one method interface that we have here. And with this interface, we can do a ton of different things. So the first use case is, if you look at this carefully and you know your design patterns, it's really just a strategy or command pattern. And we've all probably done these a number of times. You can do lots of things with these. I've used dispatchables to simply say, hey, here my request is this metadata and this content, and I'm going to dispatch this and get something back. A good use case might be a queue system of some sort, because typically you dispatch a method and maybe you get a response back, maybe you don't care. Another use case are server classes. So the server classes are really just mini MVC systems in many ways. They are taking a request, parsing it to figure out, do I get what I actually need, and then it's returning a response in the appropriate format. So we can do a lot with the server classes here. They could really benefit from the same architecture. The HTTP client kind of inverts the whole idea. Instead it says, I'm going to send a request and get a response back instead of accept a request and send a response back. But we're able to use the same pattern with the HTTP client that we did with the MVC from this. And finally, of course, the MVC applications. Basically, we said, hey, our controllers are simply handling some request data and returning a response back. So why don't our controllers simply implement this? Well, this opens up a whole bunch of possibilities. Remember the server classes? In Zend Framework 1, you have to wrap those inside of a controller. So now you have this routing layer, and then you've got all this other stuff that's going on. And then finally, I can get to it. Now I have to marshal my own request and my own response and then send that back. It's really kind of messed up. If it's just dispatchable and it's using the same basic concept of request and response, now all I have to do is attach it directly to my MVC layer. That's it. It can be a first-class citizen of my MVC, which is fantastic. The other thing is I can start creating like a service layer of some sort and say, hey, you know what? I want to be able to directly expose this. All I'm doing is returning some results, and my view layer can figure out what to do with those results. I can now just say, I'm going to make it dispatchable and do something with it. So there are a lot of different use cases we can have. So you've come to this session, and you've heard about the beta 1 today and everything. You're actually probably interested in what an application will look like. So we'll look at this right now. Now, the MVC layer has really gelled in the last 6 weeks. I had a prototype. I've had like probably 8 or 9 or 10 different prototypes over the last year and a half. And I've cleaned up one of them and dumped it in the repository where one of our contributors said I should do it. And we started talking about it, and it just kind of snowballed. And it's been fun. It's been a crazy 6 weeks. Basic idea is that you have an application object. And an application is going to compose a router, a locator, and an event manager. Now, you see I'm using the word locator here. It could be a dependency injection container, or it could be a service locator. Basically, we have a simple interface called locator that just has a get method. So what this allows you to do is, if DI is too heavy or if you really want to customize it, you can actually just create your own locator and attach it. The application doesn't care. It just says, can I locate what I need to? Now, it then goes and routes, and routing, when you get a match, should return a controller name, just that. We don't care about anything else, this modular action, all this stuff. There are always too many little variables in that equation to satisfy everybody. So we said, let's just do a controller name. And now we're going to pull that controller by name from the locator. So we have this controller name. We pull it from the locator. Now that object, that controller, has all the dependencies it needs. And we dispatch it, because it's a dispatchable. Now, I mentioned it's all event-driven. Routing and dispatching are events as well. So that means if you want to replace any of this, you can. Now, fun point of fact, we have to worry about what people are going to do when it comes time for them to migrate from Zend Framework 1 to Zend Framework 2. So I started thinking about this, and I was like, well, I think we can mimic a lot of the functionality in Zend Framework 2. Routing is pretty much the same. Dispatch is a little different. What could I do? Oh, it's just an event. I'll create a different handler, get rid of the one that's in there by default, and just drop this in. In about 4 hours, I had a pretty much functional Zend Framework 1 emulation layer and Zend Framework 2, simply because I'm able to swap out these events if I need to. It's a really powerful paradigm. Now, the next decision that was made was that everything will be a module. Now, the modular architecture in Zend Framework 1 is a complete joke, and I'll be the first to admit it. The whole goal all along was that we wanted to be able to take, basically have somebody write up, say, a blog module, a forum module, a news module of some sort, and be able to just drop that into their application. Zend Framework 1, you can't do that. I know a few people here have probably written modular systems, but they probably had to work around all the problems of Zend Framework 1, right? So we said, okay, what if just everything were a module, including your basic homepage and everything was a module? And we started thinking about that. Okay, so module now is just a namespace with a single class inside of it called module. Now, you can have many more than that, but all we expect is this namespace with a module class. That's it. Now, there will be some structure that you may want to do, but this is really all it is. We've got a modules directory, a foo module, that's our namespace here, and a module.php. And that class file looks like that. That's it. You'll, of course, probably want to put something interesting in there, but this is all that it needs. We will say within the application and module manager, we're going to be interested in certain things. For instance, if you have an init method defined, we'll trigger it. If you have a get config method in there, we'll grab that, we'll merge all the configuration together, and now you have your application configuration in one place. But really, all you need is this class. That's a single entry point. What's really empowering about this idea is that you could actually make functionality that works across a variety of different projects or frameworks. And by dropping in this class, now Zend Framework is able to do something with it. What might you want to put in there? That init method might want to put in some auto-loading artifacts so that you can actually get to the classes within the module. We're recommending creating class maps, but you don't have to. You could just use one of the standard autoloaders if you want. The PSR 0 compliant ones, a class map autoloader, whatever you want to put in there. We actually are recommending putting in some artifacts that are completely framework agnostic so that you could package this up and just start using the functionality. I've actually done that with a couple modules I've written at this point, and it's truly empowering. Some configuration you might want to do. Well, if you're going to have any MVC endpoints in here, you probably want to have your routes so that you can tell them where to go. And your DI configuration. Because remember, your controllers, by default, are going to be pulled from the DI container. So you want to have some configuration on that. If they have dependencies, you want to tell them that. But really, they can contain just about anything. PHP code, including the MVC code, but not limited to MVC code. You could have public assets such as your style sheets, your JavaScript, your images, unit tests. Well, please test your stuff, especially if you're going to distribute it for others to drop into their applications. You can drop your unit tests in there. Documentation. You can put anything you want in these. We don't care. All we're going to look for is that module class so that we can figure out what we can consume directly within our application. Now, by having this paradigm of modules and by having this very simple application structure of routing and then pulling out a locator and dispatching, we actually have a very, very simple index.php file. That index.php, basically you're going to, I think it's going to show up here in a moment. Basically, you're going to grab some configuration that details what modules you're interested in. And when we have those modules, we're going to loop through, pass them into the manager. Manager is going to be passed into a bootstrap. Bootstrap will bootstrap the application, and then we're going to send it. 9 times out of 10, you'll probably never have to change your index.php. It's that flexible. What the application does, what the bootstrap does is it says, I'm going to take that configuration that I got, I'm going to set up my locator with that information and pass it into the application object. I'm going to take the routes that I got. I'm going to configure a router. I'm going to pass that into the application. And then I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to trigger an event. And that event is going to be a bootstrap event. So if my modules register with that bootstrap event, now they can do some post tasks. One of the things that people have often asked for in Zend Framework 1 is the ability to basically set up certain resources or view-related things if my particular module is selected. Well, you can do that now. So what you can say is, okay, I'm going to grab, well, when I get the bootstrap method is triggered, I'm now going to register some other methods, some other event listeners that are going to listen to things like routing or dispatch, figure out what's going on, and if so, I'm going to do a few more things. These listeners get access to the application object and the module manager, which means they have access to all the configuration, they have access to the locator, they have access to routes, so they can figure out everything at this point. So you can have some incredible introspection into what is happening in this particular request and set things up that are specific to that request if you want. It's truly some fun stuff. I've set up authorization layers, I've set up some logging, I've set up some alternate view handling, I've set up some listeners that check to see what the accept header is, and based on that send off a different view rendering, so like JSON or XML, that sort of thing. It's trivially easy. Now, that's the application level. This is the macro level. What is the controller? I mean, really, as developers, we're writing controllers, right? And we're doing stuff. And your application layer, if you're doing things right, you're creating a service layer that's domain specific. So that's kind of framework agnostic typically. I don't have to show you that part. How you consume that is the bigger part, and that's going to be through your controllers. So your controller is going to be within your namespace of your module. And wow, it doesn't look really much different than Zend Framework 1, does it? We've actually tried to make it as familiar as possible so that you can just start working with Zend Framework 2 right away. Now, the things that are different in here, the way the request object works, it's a much richer object. So we actually pull a query container, a container, a variable container, having all the query variables, so your get variables, and then you pull out of that specifically. You can get access to any header that you want in there, all your cookies, that sort of thing. And you'll notice another thing in there is that I'm not actually assigning anything to the view. One of the things, sorry about that. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is separation of concerns. Really, the controller shouldn't be worried about the view at all. The view and the model should be somewhat aware of each other. The model is going to return something that's interesting that the view might be able to use in rendering. So why don't we just return that directly from the controller? By doing that, we can completely divorce from the view, and we can leverage that event system to do interesting things. But the more important part is that controllers are simply dispatchable. So you can have any dispatchable class. You can write your own logic within the dispatch method to handle the thing coming in. So you can make it as lightweight or as heavy as you want. We have two basic implementations, the action controller, which we just saw, and also a RESTful controller. It's not a full REST implementation. It's not HADOS, happy and all that stuff. But it is gives you, the basic paradigms that you need for interacting with HTTP methods, so they get, put, post, and doing the appropriate things in a RESTful way. What these also do is they give you a little bit more hooks into the MVC system than you might have otherwise. I've talked a lot about dependency injection, but sometimes you need to do conditional dependencies. So for instance, if your controller has certain paths that have more resources than others, you may not want to have all those resources injected at once. So one of the things we've done is a locator-aware interface where you can say, hey, I want the locator injected in me before you dispatch me so that I can pull things out from it when I want to. Both of these controllers implement that and have an implementation in there. We also have a specialized event. So I mentioned that events are, just name, target, parameters, but you can also have custom events, and we have a custom one within the MVC layer called the MVC event that has knowledge of the router, the route matches, the request, the response, and you can also set the result in there, which allows you to do some really interesting things. So these are aware of that and will get injected with that particular event before they get dispatched. The other thing is, one of the things that we introduced in Zend Framework 1 was the concept of action helpers. We realized that that's actually still a very viable situation for a tool for developers, because you don't want to have to implement your redirection logic every single time or generation of a URL from the router every single time. So we've made these two particular controllers pluggable, and so they get a plugin broker injected into them, or you can lazy load it yourself, and you can pull those out if you need to. So these basic implementations give you a bunch of features that are going to be really useful to you, but if you want to opt out of those, just create something that's just simply dispatchable, and you can do whatever you want. Now, I mentioned about the view not being directly integrated with the controller. Now, you could inject the view into the controller if you want to, and that's perfectly viable. However, by simply returning the, having a return value out of the action controller, it makes it easier for you to unit test. It makes it easier for you to use in alternate situations that might be outside of the MVC. So in order to accommodate that situation, we created a view listener. And this isn't actually in the Zend Framework 2 repository, but it's in our skeleton application. And basically what this does is it says, I'm going to listen to the dispatch event twice with different priority. The first one, you can see on lines 11 and 12 there, is basically saying I want to render a view at low priority. So after things have dispatched, I'm going to take the results of that and I'm going to render them. And then even later, so I have a minus 1,000 priority, I'm going to take whatever is happening and I'm going to try and render a layout. And that's it. So we're able to do basically the work of Zend layout and the view render in Zend Framework 1 in fewer lines of code in a more flexible manager that you can opt in and opt out of at any time. And so this was a very powerful thing. And again, it was something we were able to enable simply because we had this better architecture that allows for it. I've talked quite a bit about getting dependencies, and maybe I should have flipped these slides around, I'm not sure. But when you have your controllers, you want to have the dependencies injected typically. And I said you could pull them out of the locator if you want, but it's much better to simply inject them. All you have to do is define setters. That's it. You define setters. You maybe have to hint to the DI configuration that you need to do something with it, but that's it. Your dependencies are going to be injected, not pulled, which makes it easier for you to test and makes it easier to put alternate implementations easily, and you basically get away from the spaghetti mess that Zend Framework 1 controllers have. Configuration can be as easy or as hard as you want. That definition up at the top could actually most likely be compiled so that you don't even have to do this. All you're going to have is the stuff at the bottom where our parameters are the host, the user, and the password. That's it. That's really easy to configure. We've done simple things like this within our INI files 1 billion times. So you can make it as easy as or as hard as you want. But the point is that if you inject it, you have more options. So this is really a high-level overview of the MVC. It's incredibly flexible. There's a lot of stuff going on with it. And you can learn more about it at the conference itself. I've got 2 contributors here who have done a ton on the MVC. Evan Curry basically, I threw this idea of modules out there, and he took it and said, oh, this is really cool. I know exactly what I want to do with this. And he ran with it and basically did this incredibly robust implementation that's also incredibly simple and elegant. And he's going to be hopefully talking about that at the OnCon. He's going to sign up for that tomorrow afternoon. And Ben Schultzen authored the router component. He actually has been maintaining the Zend Framework 1 for quite a while, but he realized that, hey, we could do things even better in Zend Framework 2 if we're unshackled and unfettered with all this stuff from Zend Framework 1, and so he rewrote it. This despite a cycling accident he had where he broke his collarbone. So these 2 individuals up here, Ben and Evan right here, will be giving that tomorrow. We have a lot of tools for you written. We wanted to make it simple for you to get started. We created a Zend skeleton application and a Zend skeleton module. The skeleton application has all your bootstrapping, that index.php I showed you. It has an application module that has a home page and basic configuration. It has that view listener we talked about. And you can follow the instructions on this page where you just do a git clone recursive, and it gets Zend Framework 2 for you and drops that into the library, and then it has a skeleton application, and you can just start running with it. The other thing that we have is a skeleton module that gives you the suggested structure for your modules. You can deviate from it if you want, but this gives you the basic tools to start writing your own modules. So we're really excited about the MVC system. I've actually rebuilt my personal site on top of it. I haven't released it yet because I need to map old URLs and all this crap. But it was amazingly trivial to go through and separate my stuff into modules, and I actually got a lot more confidence that it was something I could release because the structure is just so solid and so flexible and elegant and simple. The other thing we're really excited about is packaging. Zend Framework 1, we've talked about it being a use-at-will architecture. So you can pull in, if you just want the ACLs, just start using the ACLs. If you just want the mailer, start using the mailer. Now, it's a use-at-will architecture, but it's not an install-at-will architecture. You get the whole framework or nothing, right? So this has been a common complaint. People say, well, if you're really a use-at-will architecture, then why do I have to install the entire framework? Why do I have to get those 2 megabyte or 20 megabyte tarballs off of the website if all I want is, one component? So we said, you know what? Sure, let's do that. So we were looking at options. There's been a lot of debate on the lists. We finally, as a team, just decided, hey, Pyrus does like 80% of what the users are asking for already, and they haven't released, completely stable yet, so we could probably influence how it goes. And actually, Ralph has been working with Helgi and Brett Bieber very closely. They're the leads on Pyrus, and incorporating features, and they've been really receptive to what we're doing. Basically, it allows you to install individual components and their dependencies at once. So if you say, I just want HTTP, Pyrus install Zend HTTP. It will grab at that and any dependencies it needs. We also have the ability to do meta packages. So we created a Zend framework package that has a special group called standard, which is the standard distribution that has all the components. So when you do that, you say Pyrus install Zend framework #standard. It will go and grab all of the packages in that list and drop them at once, which is great. You can install per project. So if you want to do it in this particular project and manage what version you're on for this particular project, you can do that. Or you can do it system-wide. And these are things that people have been wanting to do. Now, Pair has allowed you to do localized installs, but it's always been really hard. You have to really know the Pair RC really well. And Pyrus has made this much simpler. The other thing Pyrus has done is made the installation paradigm for Pyrus much easier. You download a FAR and you execute it. That's it. So this is now enabled, and we're doing that. You can still get those full and minimal packages you're used to off of framework.zend.com, but we have this other distribution mechanism. We're really going to be pushing it. So I'm going to start wrapping up here. Of course, a lot of you are asking, when is it going to be available? And of course, Andy announced earlier today, but for those who are just tuning in, I know this is being streamed live. Beta 1 dropped today. We are not doing the typical alpha beta cycle that you usually see in open source projects. We've decided that, really when it comes down to it, developers never test alphas. And we want you guys to test. What? Or RCs, yeah, that's true. But we want people to test stuff. The MVC layer is strong and robust enough now that we feel that, we want you guys hammering on it. We want to know exactly what the problems are so that we can hammer them out beforehand. So we're going to do Gmail-style betas. We're going to keep adding features in each beta. We're not going to guarantee backwards compatibility between them until we get to the point where we have fulfilled all the development milestones towards our standard distribution. Once we get to that point, we'll start freezing, and we'll probably have a beta or so in between, and we'll have an RC that says, okay, API is frozen, and we're ready to go. We're hoping that you guys will download and test. Don't do it on the public Wi-Fi here, please. We don't need that. But we think what we are offering right now is compelling enough that we want you to start building on it. We're going to be releasing new betas at least every 6 weeks. We want to do them, hopefully, be anywhere in that 4 to 6 week range. We're trying to keep the goals for each beta very concise and very directed so that we can actually do them. For instance, this next one, somebody's been working on the caching component refactor of it for quite a while. He's basically just about ready. Just needs a little bit more time to do it. We're going to be able to finish that up, get it polished, get the docs done correctly, and drop it in. Logging and mailer, we're going to refactor and get those in. Logging, somebody's already been working on that in a branch. I've got ideas about the mailer. And somebody else has been a contributor who's been doing all the internationalization and localization layer, has been working on that for some time, and it sounds like he's just about ready as well. So we can kind of get these things, get a nice discrete set of features and say, hey, here we are. We're also incorporating feedback from last beta. We'll push it out. We're going to keep doing these betas until we're done. I anticipate it's probably going to be at least 6 months. I'm hoping not much more than that. But that doesn't mean you can't start building now, and we actually highly recommend doing it. If you're interested in helping out, please do. We've got a splash page for Zend Framework 2 on the framework site. So framework.zend.com/zf2. We're doing everything in Git. I'm posting a GitHub URL here, but we actually have our own Git repository on the framework servers. That's the actual canonical one. GitHub has been kind enough to sync twice a day into all the changes that we have from there into GitHub. We recommend using GitHub. Fork the repository so that you don't have to host your own. Fork it onto GitHub. Create local branches and push them up. Send us pull requests. Use that system. We have gone from having a few dozen pull requests by mid-August to over 500 as of Friday. So it's very active development, and we're trying to be very transparent and incorporate as many things as people can give us. We have biweekly IRC meetings every Wednesday at 1700 UTC. So put it on your calendar. The next one is next week. During those, we discuss some architectural things, typically stuff that we've been discussing on the mailing lists already. And we also do votes. So for instance, this last one, we had a proposal for what the server architecture will look like. And we did a vote on that. People had a chance to review it, and we wanted to just finalize it. We also have on Freenode IRC a zftalk.2 channel. And you can go in there. You can find people who are using it already who can answer your questions. You can get direction on what things need to be worked on. So we highly encourage you going there. We also have a mailing list. I forgot to put that on here, but framework.zend.com/archives has information on that. The one, if you are interested in contributing, is ZF-contributors. If you're not familiar with Git, we have a Git guide, bit.ly/ZF2 Git guide, all one word. That's a good one to go to that goes and gives our recommendations on how you should be using Git so that you can do your pull requests in a way that I won't yell at you about. I'm pretty nice most of the time. For right now, you still need to sign a CLA, so make sure you get that in if you want to contribute. But there's a lot of opportunities right now. The community has snowballed at this point, and there's just a tremendous amount of momentum, so this is a great time to get in on the project. I'd like to thank you for coming. I can answer some questions here right now if you'd like. My nick on Twitter as well as IRC is WeirOFinney. All one word, lowercase, no spaces or apostrophes, and tremendously difficult to spell because of that EIE bit. Feel free to at me if you want to. Don't be offended if I don't follow you. I can't follow everybody, but feel free to give us feedback there. I'd give you the joined in link, but the talks have shuffled around, so just give me the feedback any way you can. Are there any questions? Anything anybody wants to ask at this time? Yes? You're wondering about work on Zend PDF? We had a couple of people who were working on it, one of whom has left the project for personal reasons. So I don't know what the state is at this point. If you want to work on it, jump in and write up what you want to do. Other questions? Yeah?
What's going on with NoSQL classes, Couch, Mongo?
He's asking what's going on with NoSQL classes like Couch and Mongo and that sort of thing. It's something we're very interested in. Right now, we're not targeting it for the general access release, most likely for 2.1. If you have a compelling, if you've done some work on it and want to send a proposal up and everything, feel free. If it's ready, we'll include it. Other questions? Yeah, Dave? jQuery versus Dojo. This is an interesting one. There was a really interesting debate probably about 6 months ago or thereabouts. Basically, the guy who'd been maintaining jQuery said he wasn't going to anymore. And he had some really compelling reasons there. He said, when it comes down to it, when you build these nice UIs and everything, you end up having to write your JavaScript anyway. So his feeling was, why should we have this integration layer? Now, the opposite side of that is when you're prototyping things, having that view integration and the form integration can be really useful. So we're still kind of in flux. Interestingly enough, since then, somebody has stepped up and done a whole lot of work on Zend Dojo in both ZF2 and ZF1 and made it really stable. So, right now we're including it in the standard distribution. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. If we don't drop jQuery, it'll move into the library. We're not going to have an extras repository anymore. So we'll do that. It's going to be highly dependent on somebody stepping up and saying, I'm going to maintain it, though. Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns? I see no hands going once. Done. Okay. Thanks for coming, everybody, and go download the beta today.